Chapter 11. Homer Wells did not recognize the voice that spoke to him from the car. "What have you got in the bag, Homer?" asked Mr. Rose. "It's nice of you working all night to make my house nice for me, Homer," he said. When he stepped in front of his headlights, his black face was still hard to see. "Mr. Rose," Homer said. "Mr. Wells," said Mr. Rose, smiling. They shook hands, while Homer's heart calmed down. Candy was still hiding in the cider house, and Mr. Rose felt that Homer wasn't alone. Candy walked, guiltily, into the light. "Mrs. Worthington," said Mr. Rose. "Mr. Rose," Candy said, smiling, shaking his hand. "We're just in time," she said to Homer, poking him. "We have just prepared all the bed linen," she told Mr. Rose. Mr. Rose nodded and smiled. Then the baby cried. Candy jumped. "I wrote to Wally about bringing the daughter," Mr. Rose explained, as a young woman, about Angel's age, walked into the light with a baby in her arms. "I haven't seen you since you were a little girl," Homer Wells told the young woman, who looked at him blankly. A trip with a small child was exhausting. "My daughter," Mr. Rose said in introduction. "And her daughter," he added. "Mrs. Worthington," said Mr. Rose, introducing her, and Homer Wells. "Candy," Candy said, shaking the young woman's hand. "Homer," Homer said. He couldn't remember the daughter's name, and so he asked her. She looked a little startled, and looked at her father. "Rose," Mr. Rose said. Everyone laughed, the daughter, too. The baby stopped crying and looked with wonder at the laughter. "No, I mean your first name," said Homer Wells. "Rose is her first name," said Mr. Rose. "You already heard it." "Rose Rose?" Candy asked. The daughter smiled. "Rose Rose," said Mr. Rose proudly. Everyone laughed again, the baby was cheering up, and Candy played with the little girl's fingers. "And what's her name?" Candy asked Rose Rose. This time, the young woman answered for herself. "She doesn't have a name, yet," Rose Rose replied. "We're still thinking how to call her," said Mr. Rose. Homer offered his help to unpack the things, but Mr. Rose refused. So Homer and Candy started walking back to the office. "He knows," Homer said to Candy, as they were walking. "Of course he knows," Candy said. "I guess it doesn't matter," Homer said. "What's the bag for?" Candy asked him, before she kissed him good night. "It's for me," said Homer Wells. I think it's for me. In the morning, Candy sent Angel to the cider house to ask if Rose needed anything for the baby, and then Angel fell in love. He was shy with girls his own age. Boys his own age always teased him about his name. He thought he was the only angel in Maine. In 195, girls Angel's age looked forward to dating, boys Angel's age, as in other times, looked forward to doing things. Mr. Rose's daughter was not only the most exotic young woman that Angel had ever seen, if she had a daughter, and she had done things. It was cold and damp in the cider house in the mornings. When Angel arrived there, Rose was outside, in the sun, washing baby Rose in a bucket. The baby was splashing, and Rose was talking to her daughter. She didn't hear Angel walking up to her. Rose was only a few years older than Angel. When she was with her baby, her gestures and her expressions were womanly, and she had a full, womanly figure. She was a little taller than Angel. She had a round, boyish face. "Good morning," Angel said, startling baby Rose in the bucket. Rose wrapped her daughter in a towel and stood up. "You must be Angel," she said shyly. She had a thin scar that sliced across one nostril and her upper lip. Angel was so smitten when he first met her that even the scar was beautiful to him. It was her only apparent flaw. "Could I help you get anything for the baby?" Angel said. "I think that she is teething," Rose reported on her daughter. "She is cranky today." Mr. Rose came out of the cider house. When he saw Angel, he waved and smiled, and then he walked to him and put his arm around the boy. "How are you doing?" he asked. "You are still growing, I think." "I used to carry him on top of my head," he told Rose. "He used to grab the apples which I couldn't reach," Mr. Rose explained. "I think that I will grow a little more," Angel said. He wanted Rose to know that he would be taller than she, one day. When Angel came back home and told his father that Rose's baby was teething, Homer knew what to do. He sent Angel with Wally to town to buy some pacifiers, and then he sent Angel back to the cider house with a package of pacifiers and some whiskey. Wally drank a very little whiskey from time to time, and the bottle was 3/4 full. Homer showed Angel how to apply whiskey on baby Rose's gums. "It numbs the gums," Angel explained to Rose. He dipped his finger in the whiskey, then he stuck his finger in baby Rose's tiny mouth. Baby Rose liked it so much that when he removed his finger to apply more whiskey, the baby cried to have the finger back. "You will make her drunk," Rose warned. "No, I won't," Angel assured her. "I'm just putting her gums to sleep." Rose examined the pacifiers. They were rubber nipples, like the nipple on a baby's bottle, but without the hole and attached to a blue plastic ring that was too big to swallow. The problem with using a bottle nipple, Angel Wells explained, was that the baby would suck in air through the hole, and the air would give the baby a gassy stomach. "How do you know so much?" Rose asked Angel, smiling. "How old are you?" "I'm almost 16, Angel said. "How old are you?" "I'm about your age," she told him. In the afternoon, when Angel came back to the cider house to see how the teething was going, he saw that Mr. Rose was sitting on the cider house roof with a pacifier in his mouth. "Are you teething, too?" Angel asked. Mr. Rose removed the pacifier from his mouth slowly. "I'm giving up smoking," said Mr. Rose. "If you have a nipple in your mouth all day, you don't need a cigarette." He stuck the pacifier back in his mouth and smiled at Angel. In the cider house, Baby Rose had fallen asleep with the pacifier in her mouth. "I was checking on how the teething was going," Angel explained to Rose. "It's going fine," she said. "You're a good doctor. You're my hero, for today." She was smiling. Angel Wells was really struck by love. He was walking back to the Apple Mart and thinking, who was the baby's father? And where was he? And where was Mrs. Rose? Were Mr. Rose and his daughter all alone? Angel went to his room and began to write a list of names, girls' names. He took some names, which he liked out of the dictionary, and then he added other names that the dictionary had overlooked. How else do you impress a girl who hasn't been able to think of a name for her baby? Abby? Thought Angel Wells. Alberta. Alexandra? Amanda? Amelia? Antoinette? Audrey? Aurora? Aurora Rose, Angel said aloud. "God, no," he said, plunging into the alphabet. Bathsheba? Beatrice? Bernice? Bianca? Bridget? In Street Clouds they had another problem. Nurse Carolyn knew that it was time for her to write to Homer Wells. While Dr. Larch was resting in the dispensary, Nurse Carolyn was writing in Nurse Angela's office. "Don't be a hypocrite," she began. "I hope you remember that you were always telling me to leave Cape Kenneth, that my services were more needed here, and you were right. And do you think your services aren't needed here, or that they aren't needed right now? Do you think the apples can't grow without you? Who will replace him if you don't come? It will be one of the usual cowards who does what he's told, one of your typically careful, medical men, a little law-abiding citizen who will be of absolutely no use. Carmen, Cecilia, Charity, Claudia, Constance, Cookie, Cordelia. Angel Wells was thinking and putting on Candy's cap. Although it was cool in the early morning, he decided not to wear a shirt. Dagmar, he thought. Daisy, Dolores, Dottie. Where are you going in my hat? Candy asked him. She was picking up the breakfast dishes. It's my hat, Angel said, going out the door. Love is blind, Wally said, pushing his wheelchair away from the table. Homer and Wally were worried about Angel's love. Candy knew that Rose had too much experience to allow Angel to get carried away. That isn't the point, Homer said. The point is Mr. Rose, Wally said. Homer Wells went to the Apple Mart office. In the mail, there was a letter for him from Dr. Large. But Homer didn't look through the mail. That was Wally's job. Besides, the picking crew had arrived. Homer had to organize the work. He looked out the office window and saw his son not wearing any shirt and talking to Big Dot Taft. He opened the door and shouted at Angel. Hey, it's cold this morning, put on a shirt. Angel was already walking toward the barns beyond the Apple Mart. The rest of the crew, except for Mr. Rose's daughter, hadn't been to Ocean View before. Mr. Rose arranged, with Angel, how Rose and her daughter would spend the day. She should ride around with you and help you, Mr. Rose told Angel. She can sit on the fender, or stand behind the seat. She can ride on the trailer, before it's full. Sure, Angel said. If she needs to take the baby back to the cider house, she can walk, Mr. Rose said. She doesn't need any special favors. No, Angel said. It surprised him that Mr. Rose would speak this way about his daughter when she was standing beside him, looking a little embarrassed. Sometimes our cook, Black Pan, can look after the baby, Mr. Rose said, and Rose nodded. Candy said she'd look after her, too, Angel offered. We don't have to bother Mrs. Worthington, said Mr. Rose, and Rose shook her head. When Angel drove the tractor, he could let Rose sit down, with or without baby Rose in her lap, and he could stand a little to one side of the seat and operate the tractor. The emergency handbrake was next to Rose's hip, the gear shift was by her knee. You should be careful, she told him. You shouldn't get involved with me. But Angel was encouraged that she'd even noticed his interest. How old are you? He asked her casually, later that day. I'm about your age, Angel, was all she said. Do you like the name Gloria? Angel asked. That's nice, said Rose. Who is it for? Your baby. Angel said. I've been thinking of names for your baby. Rose looked into Angel's eyes. Why have you been thinking of that? She asked him. Just to be of help, he said with embarrassment. Just to help you decide. Decide? Rose asked. Yes, said Angel Wells. The picker named Peaches was almost as fast as Mr. Rose. He interrupted the conversation. Angel went to look over the apples, and at that moment, Peaches said to him, You shouldn't go into the knife business with Mr. Rose. Then he walked away, with his bag and his lighter, before Angel could say anything about his apples, which were, of course, perfect. Back on the tractor, Angel asked Rose, Are you still married to the baby's father? I have never been married, she said. Are you still together, you and the father? Angel asked. Baby has got no father, Rose said. After the first 4 or 5 days of the harvest, the wind changed, the early mornings were especially cold. Angel wore a t-shirt and a sweater over that. One morning, when it was very cold, Angel saw that Rose was shivering and he gave her his sweater. She wore it all day. She was still wearing it when Angel went to help with the cider press that night, and for a while, they sat on the cider house roof together. Rose forgot to give the sweater back, but in the morning, when it was still cold, she was wearing one of Mr. Rose's old sweaters and she handed the sweater back to Angel. He says that I shouldn't wear your sweater, she told Angel. The cap was pulled lower than usual over her eyes, and Angel noticed that Rose had a black eye. I told you, she said. You shouldn't get involved with me. After the picking that day, Angel went to the cider house to have a word with Mr. Rose. Angel told Mr. Rose that he let Rose wear his sweater because of the cold. Angel added that he really liked Mr. Rose's daughter, and so forth. Angel was very excited, although Mr. Rose remained a calm man. Who told you that I beat my daughter, Angel? Mr. Rose asked gently. Rose had told Angel, of course, but now Angel saw the trap, he was only making trouble for her. Mr. Rose would never allow himself to have any trouble with Angel. Mr. Rose knew the rules, they were the real cider house rules, they were the pickers' rules. I just thought you had hit her, Angel said. Not me, said Mr. Rose. Before he put the tractor away, Angel spoke with Rose. He told her that if she was frightened to stay in the cider house, she could always stay with him, that he had an extra bed in his room, or that he could leave his room and make it into a guest room for her and her baby. A guest room? Rose said. She laughed. She told him he was the nicest man she had ever known. At supper, his father asked him, "How are you getting along with Mr. Rose?" "I'm more curious how you're getting along with Rose," Candy said. "How he's getting along with the girl is his own business," Wally said. "Right," said Homer Wells, and Wally let it pass. "How you're getting along with Mr. Rose is our business, Angel," Wally said. "Because we love you," Homer said. "Mr. Rose won't hurt me," Angel told them. "Of course he won't," Candy said. "Mr. Rose does what he wants," Wally said. "He's got his own rules," said Homer Wells. "He beats his daughter," Angel told them. "He hit her once, anyway." "Don't make that your business, Angel," Wally told the boy. "That's right," Homer said. "I'll make it my business," Candy told them. "If he's beating that girl, he'll hear about it from me." "No, he won't," Wally said. "Don't do that," Homer said. "Don't tell me what to do," she told them, and they were quiet. "Are you sure it's true, Angel?" Candy asked. "Almost sure," the boy said. 99%. "Make it 100%, Angel, before you say it's true," his father told him. "Right," Angel said as he got up from the table and cleared his dishes. The next morning Angel learned that Rose had never been in the ocean, that she'd picked citrus in Florida and peaches in Georgia, but she'd never even felt the sand. "That's crazy," said Angel Wells. "We'll go to the beach some Sunday. You should let me take you to see it." He hugged her slightly, but she suddenly cried out. When he looked at his hand, he saw her blood. After they kissed for a while, she showed him the cuts on her back. They were very thin, they were very careful cuts that would heal completely in a day or two. They were slightly deeper than scratches. "I told you," she said to Angel, but she still kissed him, hard. "You shouldn't have any business with me." Angel agreed not to talk about the cuts with Mr. Rose. Rose convinced him of that. And if Angel wanted to take her to the beach, somehow, some Sunday, they should both be as nice to Mr. Rose as they could manage. But Angel could not keep secret Mr. Rose's crime. He told the whole story to his father, and to Candy and Wally. "Did he cut her? Did he deliberately cut her?" Wally asked Angel. "There's no doubt about it," Angel said. "I'm 100% sure." I can't imagine how he could do that to his own daughter, said Homer Wells. If you speak to him, he'll hurt her more, Angel told them. I want your advice. I don't want you to do anything. I wasn't thinking of speaking to him, Candy said angrily. I was thinking of speaking to the police. You can't cut your own children. But will it help her, if he gets in trouble? Homer asked. Precisely, Wally said. We can't help her by going to the police. Or by speaking to him, Angel said. I could ask her to stay with us, Angel suggested. That would get her away from him. I mean, she could just stay here, even after the harvest. But what would she do? Candy asked. There aren't any jobs around, said Homer Wells. Not after the harvest. Are you in love with Rose, Angel? Homer asked his son. Yes, Angel said. And I think she likes me, at least a little. He cleared his own dishes and went upstairs to his room. What do you think of that? Homer asked Candy. Angel's in love. I hope it makes him more sympathetic to us, Candy told him. But Homer Wells was thinking about Mr. Rose. How far would he go? What were his rules? When Wally wheeled himself back into the house, he told Homer that there was some mail for him in the Apple Mart office. I'd like to bring it to the house, Wally told him, but I keep forgetting it. Just keep forgetting it, Homer advised him. It's the harvest. I don't have time to answer any mail. Nurse Carolyn's letter had also arrived. It was waiting for him with Dr. Large's letter, and with a letter from Melanie. Melanie had returned the questionnaire to Homer. She hadn't filled it out, she'd just been curious, and she'd wanted to look it over more closely. After she'd read it a few times, it was clear to her that the Board of Trustees were a collection of idiots. Across the blank questionnaire, Melanie had written a brief message to Homer Wells. Dear Homer, I thought you were going to be a hero. My mistake. Sorry for hard time. Love, Melanie. Much later that night, when he couldn't sleep, as usual, he decided to get up and read his mail. He read Melanie's message, Dr. Large's letter, and Nurse Carolyn's, too, and any doubts that were remaining about the doctor's bag with the initials FS engraved in gold had disappeared. Homer decided not to send Melanie's response to the questionnaire to Large or to Nurse Carolyn. He sent a single, short note, addressed to them both. The note was simple and mathematical. I am not a doctor. I believe that the fetus has a soul. I'm sorry. Sorry? Said Wilbur Large, when Nurse Carolyn read him the note. He says he's sorry? Of course, he isn't a doctor, Nurse Angela admitted. He will always be afraid to make an amateur mistake. That's why he would be a good doctor, said Dr. Larch. Doctors who think they know everything are the ones who make the most amateur mistakes. A good doctor should think that there's always something he doesn't know, that he can always kill someone. He believes the fetus has a soul, does he? Larch asked. Fine. He believes that a creature that lives like a fish has a soul. So he should believe in what he can see. If he's going to play God and tell us who's got a soul, he should take care of the souls who can talk back to him. He was furious. Then Nurse Angela said, So we wait and see. Not me, said Wilbur Larch. Homer can wait and see, he said, but not me. He sat at the typewriter in Nurse Angela's office. He wrote this simple, mathematical note to Homer Wells. You know everything I know, plus what you've taught yourself. You're a better doctor than I am, and you know IT. You think what I do is playing God, but you presume that you know what God wants. Do you think that's not playing God? I am not sorry, not for anything I've done. I'm not even sorry that I love you. Mrs. Grogan asked him if he wanted some tea, but Dr. Larch told her that he felt too tired for tea, he wanted to lie down. Nurse Carolyn and Nurse Edna were picking apples, and Larch went a little way up the hill to speak to them. You're too old to pick apples, Edna, Larch told her. Let Carolyn and the children do it. He then walked a short distance with Nurse Carolyn, back toward the orphanage. Then he went into the dispensary and closed the door. Despite the harvest weather, it was still warm enough to have the window open during the day. He closed the window, too. It was a new, full can of ether. The ether dripped onto the face mask more freely than usual. His hand kept slipping off the cone before he could get enough to satisfy himself. He turned a little toward the wall, that way, the edge of the windowsill kept contact with the mask over his mouth and nose after his fingers relaxed their grip. There was just enough pressure from the windowsill to hold the cone in place. He started his travel back in time. One hand, swinging back and forth beside the bed, knocked over the ether can. Slowly, the puddle developed on the linoleum floor, it spread under the bed, and all around him. The strength of the fumes overpowered him. By the time Larch moved his face away from the windowsill and the cone fell, he was already gagging. The cause of death was respiratory failure, due to aspiration of vomit, which led to cardiac arrest. The Board of Trustees privately called it a suicide. The man was about to be disgraced. they told themselves. But those who knew him and understood his ether habit would say that it was an accident. Certainly, Mrs. Grogan knew, and Nurse Angela, and Nurse Edna, and Nurse Carolyn knew, too, that he was not a man about to be disgraced, he was a man about to be no longer of use. And Wilbur Larch had thought that he was born to be a man of use. Nurse Edna found his body. She thought that the odor was especially strong and that Dr. Larch had been in the dispensary longer than usual. It was Nurse Angela who said it all, according to the rules. "Let us be happy for Dr. Larch," she said to the attentive children. "Dr. Larch has found a family." "Good night, Dr. Larch," Nurse Angela said. "Good night, Dr. Larch." The children called. "Good night, Wilbur." Nurse Edna managed to say. That Sunday at Ocean View was an Indian summer day and Homer Wells was fishing. It was not real fishing. Homer was trying to find out more about the relationship between Mr. Rose and his daughter. The two men were sitting on the cider house roof. For the most part, they weren't talking. Below them, Angel was trying to teach Rose how to ride a bicycle. Homer had offered to drive Rose and Angel to the beach, but it mattered to Angel that he and Rose were independent. The beach was too far to walk to, and Homer didn't allow Angel to hitchhike, but it was only a 4 or 5 mile ride on a bike, and the road was mostly flat. Mr. Rose observed the lesson calmly, but Homer grew anxious. He knew how much preparation had gone into the trip, how Angel had fussed over both his own and Candy's bicycles. Angel was running alongside the wobbly bicycle, which Rose struggled to ride. After the bike was moving at a comfortable speed, Angel would release his hold on it. But Rose was unable to balance the bicycle and pedal it at the same time. "Can you ride a bicycle?" Mr. Rose asked Homer. "I have never tried," said Homer Wells. There were no bicycles at the orphanage. The children could use them to ride away. "I have never tried, either," said Mr. Rose. He watched his daughter zigzag over a slight hill. She fell, and Angel Wells ran to her, to help her up. A line of men were sitting with their backs against the cider house wall. Some were drinking coffee, some were drinking beer, but all of them were watching the bicycle lesson. "Do you remember what you said to me, once, about the rules?" Homer asked Mr. Rose. "What rules?" Mr. Rose asked. "You know, those rules which I put up every year in the cider house," Homer said. "And you mentioned that you had other rules, your own rules for living here." "Yeah, those rules," said Mr. Rose. "I thought you meant that your rules were about not hurting each other. I thought they were about being careful," Homer said. Like my rules, too, I guess. Say what you mean, Homer, said Mr. Rose. Is someone getting hurt? Homer asked. I mean, this year, is there some kind of trouble? Rose was upon the bicycle. Her look was grim, both she and Angel were sweating. She rode out of sight behind some apple trees, and Angel sprinted after her. Why don't they just walk? The picker named Peaches asked. They would be there now. Why doesn't someone take them in a car? Another man asked. They want to do it their own way, Muddy said. There was a little laughter about that. Show some respect, said Mr. Rose. Homer thought that Mr. Rose was speaking to him, but he was speaking to the men, who stopped laughing. That bicycle is going to break, Mr. Rose said to Homer. Homer Wells felt bad for Angel, but another subject weighed more heavily on his mind. So is someone getting hurt? Homer said. I'm speaking about the rules. Mr. Rose reached into his pocket, slowly, and Homer expected to see the knife, but it was not the knife that Mr. Rose removed from his pocket and very gently placed in Homer's hand. It was the burned down nub of a candle. It was what was left of the candle that Candy had lit for their lovemaking in the cider house. In her panic, when she thought it was Wally who had caught them there, she had forgotten it. Homer closed his fingers around the candle, and Mr. Rose patted his hand. That's against the rules, isn't it? Mr. Rose asked Homer. Homer put the candle in his pocket. He and Mr. Rose looked at each other. It was almost a contest, the way they looked at each other. I'm worried about your daughter, said Homer Wells, after a while. Together they watched Rose fall off the bicycle again. Don't worry about her, said Mr. Rose. She looks unhappy, sometimes, Homer said. She isn't unhappy, Mr. Rose said. Are you worried about her? Homer asked him. Once you start worrying, you can worry about anybody, can't you? Said Mr. Rose. Homer and Mr. Rose missed the moment when Rose gave up. They just noticed that she was running away, and that Angel was running after her. Both bicycles were left behind. That's too bad, Homer said. Maybe I can convince them to let me drive them there. Leave them alone, said Mr. Rose. It sounded like a command. They don't have to go to the beach, Mr. Rose said, more mildly. They're just young, they're not sure how to have a good time, he said. Just think what might happen at the beach. They might drown. Or some people might not like a white boy with a colored girl. It's better for them not to go anywhere, Mr. Rose concluded. That was the end of that subject, because then Mr. Rose asked, "Are you happy, Homer?" "Am I happy?" said Homer Wells. "Why do you repeat every single thing?" Mr. Rose asked him. "I don't know," Homer said. "I'm happy, sometimes," he said cautiously. "That's good," said Mr. Rose. "And Mr. and Mrs. Worthington, are they happy?" "I think they're happy, most of the time," Homer told him. "That's good," said Mr. Rose. Rose was lying in the dark grass under an apple tree. Angel Wells was lying beside her. She let her arm loll on his waist. He ran his finger very lightly over her face, following the line of her scar down her nose to her lip. When he got to her lip, she kissed his finger. She had taken off the work shoes and the blue jeans, but she kept the t-shirt on. "We'll go to the beach another day," Angel said. "We won't go anywhere," she said. They kissed each other for a while. Then Rose said, "Tell me about it again." Angel Wells began to describe the ocean, but she interrupted him. "No, not about that," she said. "Tell me how we're all living together in the same house. You and me and my baby and your father and Mr. and Mrs. Worthington," Rose said. "I like it," she said, smiling. And he began again, about how it was possible. He was sure that his father and Wally and Candy wouldn't object. "You're all crazy," she told Angel. "But go on," she said. There was plenty of room, Angel assured her. She shut her eyes. With her eyes shut, she could see what Angel was describing a little better. Angel talked all day, he just went on and on and on. In his story, Rose and everyone else got along perfectly. In the late afternoon, she was starting to stand up when an apparent cramp, or the pain from her fall against the bicycle's crossbar, dropped her to her knees, and Angel caught her round her shoulders. "You hurt yourself on the bicycle, didn't you?" he asked her. "I was trying to," she said then. "What?" he asked her. "I was trying to hurt myself," Rose told him, "but I don't think I hurt myself enough." "Enough for what?" he asked. "To lose the baby," she told him. "Are you pregnant?" Angel asked her. "Again," she said. "Again and again, I guess," she said. "Somebody wants me to keep having babies." "Who?" Angel asked her. "Never mind," she told him. "Someone who's not here?" he asked. "Oh, he's here," Rose said. "But never mind." "Is the father here?" Angel asked. "The father of this one, yeah, he's here," she said, patting her flat stomach. Who is he? Angel asked. Never mind who he is, she told Angel. Tell me that story again, only make it 2 babies. Now they're me and you, and everybody else, and 2 babies, she said. Won't we all have fun? Angel was shocked. Rose kissed him and hugged him, and she changed her tone of voice. You see? She whispered to him, holding him tight. We wouldn't have fun at the beach, Angel. Do you want the baby? He asked her. I want the one I got, she told him. I don't want this one. She struck herself as hard as she could when she said this. She bent herself over again. She lay in the grass. Do you want to love me or help me? She asked him. Both, he said miserably. There is no such thing as both, she said. You should help me, that's easier. You can stay with me, Angel began again. Don't tell me any more about that, Rose said angrily. Don't tell me any more names for my baby, either. Just help me, she said. How? Angel asked. Just get me an abortion, Rose said. I don't know anybody to ask, and I have no money. Angel thought that the money he'd been saving to buy his first car would probably be enough money for an abortion. He had saved about $500, but the problem was that the money was in a savings account, the trustees of which were his father and Candy. Angel couldn't take any money out without their signatures. So he told them the whole story. She doesn't want to tell you who the father is? Homer Wells asked Angel. No, Angel said. Probably Peaches, Candy said. Does it matter if she doesn't want to say who the father is? The main thing is she doesn't want the baby, said Homer Wells. The main thing is to get her an abortion. Wally and Candy were quiet. You'll have to take her to St. Cloud's, Homer told Angel. But I don't think she wants to have the baby, Angel said. And if she had it, I don't think she'd want to leave it in the orphanage. Angel, Homer said, she doesn't have to have a baby in St. Cloud's. She can have an abortion there. Wally moved the wheelchair back and forth. Candy said, I had an abortion there, once, Angel. You did? Angel said. At the time, Wally told the boy, we thought we'd always be able to have another baby. It was before Wally was hurt, before the war, Candy began. Does Dr. Large do it? Angel asked his father. Right, said Homer Wells. He was thinking that he should put Angel and Rose on a train to St. Cloud's as soon as possible. Homer didn't know how much more time Dr. Larch would have to practice. "I'll call Dr. Larch right now," Homer said. "We'll put you and Rose on the next train." "Or I could drive them in the Cadillac," Wally said. "It's too far for you to drive, Wally," Homer told him. "Baby Rose can stay here, with me," Candy said. They decided that it would be best if Candy went to the cider house and brought Rose and her baby back to the house. Mr. Rose might give Rose an argument if Angel showed up at night, wanting Rose and the baby to go off with him. "He won't argue with me," Candy said. "I'll just say that I've found a lot of old baby clothes, and that Rose and I are going to dress up the baby in everything that fits her." "At night?" Wally said. "Mr. Rose isn't a fool." "I don't care if he believes me," Candy said. "I just want to get the girl and her baby out of there." "Do we have to hurry?" Wally asked. "Yes, I'm afraid we do," said Homer Wells. He had not told Candy or Wally about Dr. Larch's desire to replace himself, or what revelations and fictions had been delivered to the board. When Homer called street clouds, he got Nurse Carolyn, in their shock, in their grief, in their mourning for Dr. Larch. They had determined that Nurse Carolyn had the sturdiest voice over the phone. And they had all been trying to learn Dr. Larch's plans, and to read a brief history of street clouds as well. Every time the phone rang, they assumed it was someone from the Board of Trustees. "Carolyn?" said Homer Wells. "It's Homer." "Let me speak with the old man." Nurse Angela and Nurse Edna, and even Mrs. Grogan, would love Homer Wells forever, in spite of his note of denial, but Nurse Carolyn was younger than any of them. She did not feel the long-lasting sweetness for Homer Wells that comes from knowing someone when he's a baby. She felt he had betrayed Larch. And, of course, it was a bad time for him to ask for the old man. When Larch had died, Nurse Angela and Nurse Edna and Mrs. Grogan had said they had not been able to call Homer. Nurse Carolyn hadn't wanted to call him. "What do you want?" Nurse Carolyn asked him coldly. "Or have you changed your mind?" "There's a friend of my son's," said Homer Wells. "She's one of the migrants here. She's already got a baby who's got no father, and now she's going to have another." "Then she'll have to," Nurse Carolyn informed him. "Carolyn," said Homer Wells. "Stop it. I want to talk to the old man." "I'd like to talk to him, too," Nurse Carolyn told him, her voice rising. "Larch is dead, Homer," she said more quietly. "No," said Homer Wells, he felt his heart dancing. "Too much ether," she said. "There's no more Lord's work in St. Cloud's." If you know someone who needs it, you'll have to do it yourself. Then she slammed the phone down. Homer's throat had not ached so deeply, the pain was pushing down into his lungs. Since that night, he had yelled across the river, trying to make the Maine woods repeat the name of Fuzzy Stone. Homer shut his eyes and watched the women getting off the train. They always looked a little lost. And now they walked from the station. Homer saw them marching uphill. There were more of them than he'd remembered. They were an army, advancing on the orphanage hospital, bearing with them a single wound. Where would Nurse Edna and Nurse Angela go, and what would happen to Mrs. Grogan? Worried Homer Wells. He remembered the hatred and contempt in Melanie's eyes. If Melanie were pregnant, I would help her, he thought. And with that thought he realized that he was willing to play God, a little. Homer Wells was thinking hard when he reached into his pocket and found the burned down nub of the candle which Mr. Rose had returned to him. That's against the rules, isn't it? Mr. Rose had asked him. On his bedside table, between the reading lamp and the telephone, was his old copy of David Copperfield. Homer didn't have to open the book to know how the story began. Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else, these pages must show, he recited from memory. Homer went downstairs to the kitchen where Angel was pushing Wally around in the wheelchair. It was a game, which they played when they were both restless. Angel stood on the back of the wheelchair and pushed it. The chair went faster and faster, much faster than Wally could make it move by himself. Wally kept turning. He kept trying to miss the furniture, but despite his skill as a pilot and the good size of the kitchen floor, eventually the chair moved too fast to control and they crashed into something. Candy got angry at them for it, but they did it, anyway, especially when she was out of the house. Wally called it flying. Most of all, it was something they did when they were bored. Candy had gone to the cider house to get Rose and her baby. Angel and Wally were freewheeling. When they saw how Homer looked, they stopped. "What's the matter, old boy?" Wally asked his friend. Homer knelt by Wally's wheelchair and put his head in Wally's lap. "Dr. Large is dead," he told Wally, who held Homer while he cried. He cried a very short time. In Homer's memory, Curly Day had been the only orphan who ever cried for a long time. When Homer stopped crying, he said to Angel, "I've got a little story for you, and I'm going to need your help." They went outside to the shed where the garden things were kept, and Homer opened one of the small ether cans with a safety pin. The fumes made his eyes tear a little. He'd never understood how Large could like the stuff. He got addicted to it, Homer told his son. But he used to have the lightest touch. I've seen patients talking back to him while they were under the influence of ether, and still they didn't feel a thing. They took the ether upstairs and Homer told Angel to make up the extra bed in his room, first with the rubber sheet they'd used when Angel had still been in diapers, then the usual sheets but clean ones over that. "Is it for baby Rose?" Angel asked his father. "No, not for baby Rose," Homer said. When he unpacked the instruments, Angel sat down on the other bed and watched him. "The water's boiling," Wally called upstairs. "Do you remember how I used to tell you that I was Dr. Larch's helper?" Homer asked Angel. "Right," said Angel Wells. "Well, I became very good at helping him," Homer said. "Very good." "I'm not an amateur," he told his son. "That's the little story," Homer said, when he'd arranged everything that he needed where he could see it. Everything looked perfect. "Go on," Angel Wells told his father. "Go on with the story." Downstairs, in the quiet house, they heard Wally in his wheelchair, rolling from room to room. He was still flying. Upstairs, Homer Wells was talking to his son while he was preparing the mask. He began with that old business about the Lord's work and the devil's, how, to Wilbur Larch, it was all the work of the Lord. It startled Candy when she saw all the men on the cider house roof. Mr. Rose and his daughter were inside the cider house, and the men were waiting where they'd been told to wait. When Candy got out of the Jeep, no one spoke to her. There were no lights on in the cider house. "Hello?" Candy called up to the roof. It suddenly frightened her, how they kept silent. But the men were more frightened than Candy was. The men didn't know what to say. They knew only that what Mr. Rose was doing to his daughter was wrong, and that they were too afraid to do anything about it. "Muddy?" Candy asked in the darkness. "Yes, Mrs. Worthington." Muddy called down to her. "Peaches?" Candy said. "Yes, ma'am," Peaches said. "Please, someone hold the ladder," she said. Muddy and Peaches held the ladder, and Black Pan held her hand when she climbed up on the roof. The men made room for her, and she sat down with them. The first time she heard the sound from the cider house, it came from directly under her. Candy thought it was the baby beginning to cry. "When your Wally was a boy, everything was different," Black Pan said to her. His gaze was fixed upon the coast. The noise under the cider house roof became more distinct, and Peaches said, "Isn't it a pretty night, ma'am?" It was definitely not a pretty night. It was a darker night than usual, and the sound from the cider house was now clear to her. For a second, she thought she was going to be sick. "Be careful when you stand up, Mrs. Worthington, Muddy said to her, but Candy stamped her feet on the roof. Then she knelt down and began to beat on the tin with both her hands. The roof is very old, Mrs. Worthington, Black Pants said to her. You can fall through it. Help me down, Candy said to them. Muddy and Peaches took her arms and Black Band preceded them to the ladder. Even walking down the roof, Candy tried to keep stamping her feet. Going down the ladder, she called, Rose. She could not say the ridiculous name of Rose, and she couldn't make herself say Mr. Rose, either. Rose. She called ambiguously. Mr. Rose met her at the cider house door. He was still getting dressed, he was buttoning his trousers. He looked thinner and older to her than he'd looked before, and although he smiled at her, he didn't look into her eyes with his usual confidence, with his usual, polite indifference. Don't speak to me, Candy told him. Your daughter and her baby are coming with me. Candy walked by him into the cider house. She felt the tattered rules with her fingers as she found the light switch. Rose was sitting on the bed. She had pulled her blue jeans on. She had found only one of her work shoes, which she held in one hand. The other one was under the bed. Candy found it and put it on the correct foot. Rose wore no socks. Then Candy tied the laces for her, too. Rose just sat on the bed while Candy put on and tied her other shoe. You're coming with me. Your baby, too, Candy told the girl. Yes, ma'am, Rose said. Candy wiped the tears from Rose's face. You're fine, you're just fine, Candy said to the girl. And you're going to feel better. No one's going to hurt you. Baby Rose was asleep, and Candy was careful not to wake her when she picked her up and handed her to her mother. Rose moved uncertainly and Candy put her arm around her when they walked out of the cider house together. You're going to be just fine, Candy said to Rose. She kissed the young woman on her neck, and Rose, who was sweating, leaned against her. Mr. Rose was standing in the darkness between the Jeep and the cider house, but the rest of the men were still sitting on the roof. You're coming back, Mr. Rose said. It was not a question. I told you not to speak to me, Candy told him. She helped Rose and her baby into the Jeep. I was speaking to my daughter, Mr. Rose said with dignity. But Rose did not answer her father. She sat like a statue of a woman with a baby in her arms while Candy turned the Jeep around and drove away. Before they went into the house together, Rose said to Candy, I could do nothing about it. Of course you couldn't, Candy told her. He hated the father of my baby girl, Rose said. He has been after me ever since. "You're going to be all right now," Candy told the girl before they went inside. Through the windows, they could watch Wally flying back and forth in the house. "I know my father, Mrs. Worthington," Rose whispered. "He is going to want me back." "He can't have you," Candy told her. "He can't make you go back to him." "He makes his own rules," said Rose. "And where is the father of your beautiful daughter?" Candy asked, holding the door open for Rose and her baby girl. "My father cut him up." "He went away long ago," Rose said. "He didn't want to be involved with me anymore." "And your mother?" Candy asked, as they went in the house. "She is dead," Rose said. At that moment, Wally told Candy that Dr. Larch was dead, too. Homer didn't show his feelings, and Orphan learns how to keep things in. "Are you all right?" Candy asked Homer, while Wally wheeled baby Rose around the downstairs of the house and Angel took Rose to his room, which was prepared for her. "I'm a little nervous," Homer admitted to Candy. "It's certainly not a matter of technique, and I've got everything I need. I know I can do it. But to me, it is a living human being. I can't describe to you what it feels like. When living tissue is touched, it responds, somehow," Homer said, but Candy cut him off. "It may help you to know who the father is," she said. "It's Mr. Rose. Her father is the father, if that makes it any easier." The made-up bed in Angel's childhood room and the gleaming instruments made Rose both talkative and rigid. "This doesn't look like fun," the girl said, holding her fists in her lap. "Stay with Wally, Angel," Candy told the boy. "Give baby Rose a ride in the wheelchair. Knock over all the furniture, if you want," she told him, kissing her son. "Yeah, go away," Rose told Angel. "Don't be afraid," Candy told Rose. "Homer knows what he's doing. You're in very safe hands." Homer began to show Rose the instruments. "This is a speculum," he said to her. "It may feel cold, but it doesn't hurt." "You won't feel any of this," he assured her. "These are dilators," Homer said, but Rose shut her eyes. "You have done this before, haven't you?" Rose asked him. He had the ether ready. "Just breathe normally," he told her. At the first whiff, she opened her eyes and turned her face away from the mask, but Candy put her hands at Rose's temples and very gently moved her head into the right position. "The first smell is the sharpest," said Homer Wells. "Have you done this before?" Rose asked him. "I'm a good doctor, I really am," Homer Wells told her. "Just relax, and breathe normally." "Don't be afraid," Rose heard Candy tell her. Homer Wells started the operation. Downstairs, he heard the wheelchair moving through the house. There was a wild and non-stop giggling from baby Rose. "Tell them not to get that baby overexcited," Homer said to Candy. He did not let the noise distract him. After the first abortion, thought Homer Wells, this might get easier. Because he knew now that he couldn't play God in the worst sense. If he could operate on Rose, how could he refuse to help a stranger? How could he refuse anyone? Only a God makes that kind of decision. "I'll just give them what they want," he thought. An orphan or an abortion. Homer Wells breathed slowly and regularly. The steadiness of his hands surprised him. He did not even blink when he felt the instrument make contact. For that night, Candy slept in the extra bed in Angel's room. She wanted to be nearby if Rose needed anything, but Rose slept like a rock. Angel slept downstairs, sharing the big bed with Wally. They stayed awake quite late, talking. Wally told Angel about the time when he first fell in love with Candy. Although Angel had heard the story before, he listened to it more attentively, now that he thought he had fallen in love with Rose. Wally also told Angel that he must never underestimate the darker necessities of the world where his father had grown up. "It's the old story," Wally said to Angel. "You can get Homer out of St. Cloud's, but you can't get St. Cloud's out of Homer. And the most important thing about love," Wally said to Angel, "is that you can't force anyone. It's natural to want someone who you love to do what you want, or what you think would be good for them, but you have to let everything happen to them. You can't interfere with people whom you love any more than you interfere with people whom you don't even know. And that's hard," he added, "because you often want to interfere, you want to be the one who makes the plans. It's hard to want to protect someone else, and not be able to," Angel said. "You can't protect people, kiddo," Wally said. "All you can do is love them." Upstairs, in the bedroom, Homer Wells was wide awake. He'd volunteered to have baby Rose for the night. "Because I'll be up all night, anyway," he said. He'd forgotten how much he enjoyed looking after a baby. Babies reminded Homer of himself. They always wanted something in the middle of the night. But after he'd given baby Rose her bottle, the child went back to sleep and left Homer Wells alone again. It was nonetheless a pleasure looking at the little girl. Her black face in the bed beside him was no bigger than his hand, and occasionally her fingers opened and closed, grasping at something she saw in her sleep. Homer Wells remembered sleeping quarters in street clouds. He tried to imagine the necessary announcement. "Let us be happy for Dr. Large," Homer said softly. Dr. Larch has found a family. Good night, Dr. Larch. He didn't know which one of them had said it. Anyway, he decided to send his letter to Nurse Angela. Homer needed some more time. You must stall the board, Homer wrote to Nurse Angela. Tell them that you can't reach Dr. Stone now because the doctor is in transit between two of the missions hospitals in India. Say that you don't expect to be able to communicate with him for a week or more, and that, if he was willing to consider the position at Street Clouds, he couldn't possibly be available before November. Homer Wells hoped that this would allow him the time to tell Angel everything, and to be finished with the harvest. You must forgive me for needing all this time, Homer wrote to Nurse Angela, but perhaps I will seem more believable to the Board of Trustees if everyone has to wait for me. It takes time to leave Asia. He also asked them to send him the available history of Fuzzy Stone. He told Nurse Angela that he had loved Larch like a father, and that they had nothing to fear from Melanie. Rose spent all of Monday in the bed in Angel's room. Candy brought her baby to her from time to time, and Angel visited her every chance he could get. You're going to love this room, Angel told her. You are just crazy, Rose told him. But I already love it. It was a bad day for the harvest, Mr. Rose didn't go out. Black Pan announced that it was a good day for a fast. Mr. Rose, it appeared, was fasting. He was sitting outside the cider house in the weak sun, wrapped in a blanket from his bed. He was not talking to anyone. We'll just have to get along without him, Homer told the men. Black Pan brought him a cup of coffee and some fresh cornbread, but Mr. Rose didn't touch any of it. It was a cool day, and when the faint sun drifted behind the clouds, Mr. Rose drew the blanket over his head. At the end of the day, Muddy informed Homer, he wants to see his daughter. Just see her. He says that he won't touch her. Tell him that he can come to the house and see her there, Homer Wells told Muddy. But at supper time, Muddy came to the kitchen door alone. Candy invited him to eat with them. Rose was sitting with them, at the table, but Muddy was too nervous to stay. He says that he won't come here, Muddy told Homer. He asks her to come to the cider house. He asks to tell you that they've got their own rules. He says that you're breaking the rules, Homer. Rose sat so still at the table that she was not even chewing. She wanted to hear everything. Angel tried to take her hand, which was cold, but she pulled it away from him and kept both her hands in her lap. Muddy, Wally said, tell him that Rose is staying in my house, and that in my house we follow my rules. Tell him he's welcome to come here anytime. He won't do it, Muddy said. I have to go to see him, Rose said. No, you don't, Candy told her. Tell him that he can see her here, or nowhere, Muddy, Candy said. Yes, ma'am. I brought the bicycles back, Muddy said to Angel. They're a little broken. Angel went outside to look at the bicycles and then Muddy handed him the knife. You don't need this, Angel, Muddy told the boy, but give it to Rose. Say that I want her to have it. Angel looked at Muddy's knife. It was one of those jackknives where the blade locks in place when you open it so it can't close on your fingers. The blade was almost 6 inches long, it was very thin and the edge was very sharp. I'll give it to her, Angel said. Tell her that her father says he loves her, and he just wants to see her, Muddy said. Just see, he repeated. Angel thought a little, then he said, I love Rose, you know, Muddy. Sure I know, Muddy said. I love her, too. We all love her. Everybody loves Rose, that's her problem. If Mr. Rose just wants to see her, Angel said, why are you giving her your knife? She should have it just in case, Muddy said. Angel gave her the knife when they were sitting in his room after supper. It's from Muddy, he told her. I know who it is from, Rose said. I know what knife everyone has got, I know what they all look like. It made Angel jump to see how quickly she opened the knife using only one hand. She closed the knife against her hip, her long fingers moved the knife around so quickly that Angel didn't notice where she put it. Do you know a lot about knives? Angel asked her. From my father, she said. He showed me everything. Angel moved and sat on the bed next to her. I told you, she began patiently. You shouldn't have any business with me, I could never tell you anything about me. You shouldn't know about me, believe me. But I love you, Angel said helplessly. After she kissed him she said, Angel. Sometimes love makes no difference. Then baby Rose woke up. Do you know what her name will be? She asked Angel. Candy, Rose said. In the morning, everyone got up early, but no one got up earlier than Rose. Angel noticed that Rose and her daughter had gone. Angel and Homer got in the Jeep and drove out to the cider house before breakfast. The men were up and looking restless, and Mr. Rose was already maintaining his stoical sitting position in the grass in front of the cider house. The blanket was completely covering him, except for his face. You're too late, Mr. Rose said to them. She has long gone. Angel ran and looked in the cider house, but there was no sign of Rose or her daughter. She said that she would hitchhike, Mr. Rose told Homer and Angel. I didn't hurt her, Mr. Rose went on. I didn't touch her, Homer, he said. I just love her. I just wanted to see her, one more time. I'm sorry for your troubles, Homer Wells told the man, but Angel ran off to find Muddy. She asked to tell you that you were the nicest, Muddy told the boy. She asked to tell you that your dad was a hero, and that you were the nicest. Didn't she say where she was going? She doesn't know where she's going, Angel, Muddy told him. She just knows she has to go. I loved her, the boy said. She knows, Muddy said. She knows who she is, too, but she also knows you don't know who you are, yet. Mr. Rose maintained his almost Buddhist position. In the afternoon he asked Black Pan to bring him some water, and when the men finished picking that day, he called Muddy. Muddy was very frightened, but he approached Mr. Rose and stood at a distance of about 6 feet from him. Where is your knife, Muddy? Mr. Rose asked him. Did you lose it? I didn't lose it, Muddy told him. But I can't find it, he added. Is it around, you mean? Mr. Rose asked him. I don't know where it is, Muddy admitted. It was a cold and sunless late afternoon, but Muddy was sweating. He held his hands at his sides as if his hands were dead fish. Where did she get the knife, Muddy? Mr. Rose asked. What knife? Muddy asked him. It looked like your knife, what I saw, said Mr. Rose. I gave it to her, Muddy admitted. Thank you for doing that, Muddy, Mr. Rose said. If she is hitchhiking, I'm glad that she has got a knife with her. Peaches! Muddy screamed. Go and get Homer. Peaches came out of the cider house and stared at Mr. Rose, who didn't move a muscle. Mr. Rose didn't look at Peaches at all. Black Pan! Muddy screamed, when Peaches ran to get Homer Wells. Black Pan came out of the cider house and he and Muddy got down on their knees and peered at Mr. Rose together. Stay calm, Mr. Rose advised them. You're too late, he told them. No one is going to catch her now. She had all day to get away, Mr. Rose said proudly. Where did she cut you? Muddy asked Mr. Rose, but neither he nor Black Pan dared to touch Mr. Rose under the blanket. They just watched his eyes and his dry lips. She is good with that knife, she is better with it than you, Mr. Rose said to Muddy. I know she is good, Muddy said. She is almost the best, said Mr. Rose. And who taught her? He asked them. You did, they told him. That's right, said Mr. Rose. That's why she is almost as good as me. Very slowly, keeping himself completely under the blanket, except for his face, Mr. Rose rolled over on his side and tucked his knees up to his chest. I'm really tired of sitting up, he told Muddy and Black Pan. I'm getting sleepy. Where did she cut you? Muddy asked him again. I didn't think that it would take so long, said Mr. Rose. All the men were standing around him when Homer Wells and Peaches arrived in the jeep. Mr. Rose had very little left to say when Homer got to him. You've broken the rules, too, Homer, Mr. Rose whispered to him. Say that you know how I feel. I know how you feel, said Homer Wells. Right, said Mr. Rose, grinning. The knife had entered in the upper right quadrant, close to the rib margin. Homer knew that a knife moving in an upward direction would cut a liver. The wound could continue to bleed for many hours. Mr. Rose died in Homer's arms before Candy and Angel arrived at the cider house. Mr. Rose had managed to soak the blade of his own knife in his wound, and the last thing that he told Homer was that it should be clear to the authorities that he had stabbed himself. My daughter ran away, Mr. Rose told all of them, and I was so sorry that I stuck myself. You should say that. Let me hear you say it. He raised his voice to them. You killed yourself, Peaches told him. That was what happened, Black Man said. That was how Homer reported it, and that was how the death of Mr. Rose was received, the way he wanted it, according to the cider house rules. Rose had broken the rules, of course, but everyone at Ocean View knew the rules, which Mr. Rose had broken with her. At the end of the harvest, on a gray morning the men were picking up their few things. Homer Wells was there, and Angel had come with him to say goodbye to Muddy and Peaches and Black Pan and the rest of them. Wally had made some arrangements with Black Pan, who was going to be crew boss the following year. Wally had been right about Mr. Rose. He was the only one of them who could read well and write at all. Muddy told Angel that he'd always thought that the list of rules tacked to the kitchen wall was about the building's electricity. Because it was always near the light switch, Muddy explained. I thought they were instructions about the lights. The other men, since they couldn't read at all, never noticed that the list was there. Muddy, maybe you will see her, Angel said, when he was saying goodbye. I won't see her, Angel, Muddy told the boy. Then they left. Angel never saw Muddy again, or Peaches, or any of the rest of them except Black Pan. It wasn't a good idea to have Black Pan as a crew boss. The man was a cook, not a picker, and a boss had to be in the field with the men. Although Black Pan gathered a picking crew, he was never quite in charge of them. Wally finally settled on Jamaicans. They were friendly, non-violent, and good workers. They brought with them an interesting music and a straightforward but contained passion for beer and for a little marijuana. They knew how to handle the fruit and they never hurt each other. But after Mr. Rose's last summer at Ocean View, the Pickers never sat on the cider house roof. It just never occurred to them. And no one ever put up a list of rules again. In future years the only person who ever sat on the cider house roof was Angel Wells, because he liked that view of the ocean, and because he wanted to remember that November day in 195, after Muddy and the rest of them had left, and his father turned to him. They were alone at the cider house and said, "How about sitting on the roof for a while with me?" It's time for you to know the whole story. Another little story? Angel asked. I said the whole story, said Homer Wells. And although it was a cold day, that November, father and son sat on that roof a long time. It was, after all, a long story, and Angel asked a lot of questions. Candy, who drove by the cider house and saw them sitting up there, was worried about how cold they must be. But she didn't interrupt them, she just kept driving. She hoped that the truth would keep them warm. Then she went and got Wally out of the office. "Where are we going?" Wally asked her. She bundled him up in a blanket. "We must be going north," he said, when she didn't answer him. "My father's dock," she told him. Wally knew that Ray Kendall's dock had been blown over land and sea. He kept quiet. They were alone. Candy drove the Jeep through the empty parking lot and out to a rocky embankment. She stopped near to the ocean's edge, where she and Wally had spent so many evenings, so long ago. She wrapped Wally's legs in the blanket and then she sat down behind him. "This is fun," Wally said. She stuck her chin over his shoulder, their cheeks were touching. She hugged him around his arms and his chest, and she squeezed his hips with her legs. "I love you, Wally," Candy said, beginning her story. In late November, the Board of Trustees at Street Clouds approved the appointment of Dr. F. Stone as obstetrician and the new director of the orphanage. Dr. Stone, who appeared a little tired from his Asian traveling, made the correct impression on the board. His manner was somber, his hair was graying and cropped in an almost military fashion. Actually, Candy had cut his hair. The board also approved of Dr. Stone's medical and religious credentials. On the matter of abortions, Dr. Stone surprised the board by the adamant conviction he held, that they should be legalized, and that he intended to work through the proper channels toward that end. However, Dr. Stone assured them, as long as abortions were illegal, he would strictly support the law. He believed in rules, and in obeying them, he told the board. Dr. Stone said that he himself never would perform abortions, even if they were legalized. "I just couldn't do it," he lied calmly. Dr. Stone's Christian tolerance greatly impressed the board. Despite his disagreement with Dr. Larch on the subject of abortions, the young missionary said, "I always prayed for Dr. Larch. And I still pray for him." It was an emotional moment, and the board was predictably moved by it. And it was thrilling, after they had interviewed him, how he blessed them as he was leaving them. "Ngasak kin," said the missionary doctor. They all wanted to know what he had said. Wally, of course, had taught Homer the correct pronunciation, although he'd never learned what it meant. Homer Wells translated the phrase for them. Wally had always thought it was someone's name. "It means, Homer," told the board, "may God watch over your soul, which no man may abuse." There were loud murmurs of approval. Mrs. Goodall said, "All that in such a short phrase." "It's a remarkable language," Dr. Stone told them dreamily. "Ngasak kin," he told them again. They all repeated it after him. The Burmese phrase actually meant, curried fish balls. Candy and Wally and Angel went to Street Clouds for Christmas, and for Angel's school vacations, too. And after Angel had his driver's license, he was free to visit his father as often as he liked. It was often. When Homer arrived at the orphanage, Nurse Angela threw her arms around his neck and whispered in his ear. "Oh Homer," she whispered. "I knew you'd be back." "Call me Fuzzy," he whispered to her, because he knew that Homer Wells, like Rose, was long gone. For several days, Nurse Carolyn was shy with him, but he wouldn't need more than a few operations and a few deliveries to convince her that he was the real thing. Dr. Stone, even as a name, could be a proper successor to Dr. Larch. Stone was a good, hard, feet on the ground, reliable sounding sort of name for a physician. Candy and Wally Worthington devoted themselves to apple farming. And Angel Wells, whom Rose had introduced to love and to imagination, one day became a novelist. The kid's got fiction in his blood, Wally told Homer Wells. When Homer was tired of insomnia, he missed Angel, or he thought of Candy. Sometimes he longed to carry Wally into the surf, or to fly with him. Sometimes, when he was especially tired, he dreamed that abortions were legal, that they were safe and available, and therefore he could stop performing them because someone else would do them, but he was rarely that tired. For his education, he read carefully A Brief History of Street Clouds. And as he grew older, Homer Wells, also known as Fuzzy Stone, took special comfort in an unexplained revelation he found in the writings of Wilbur Larch. Tell Dr. Stone, Dr. Large wrote, and this was his very last entry. These were Wilbur's last words: "There is absolutely nothing wrong with Homer's heart." Except for the ether, Homer Wells knew there had been very little that was wrong with the heart of Wilbur Large. To Nurse Edna, who was in love, and to Nurse Angela, who wasn't but who had in her wisdom named both Homer Wells and Fuzzy Stone, there was no fault in the hearts of either Dr. Stone or Dr. Large, who were, if there ever were, princes of Maine, kings of New England.